When I opened the door and saw my husband standing in the kitchen with his brother, something inside me tightened. Not because of fear or guilt, not yet, but because of the way they both looked at me. He looked proud, like he'd done something thoughtful. And his brother looked amused, relaxed, like he already belonged. I stood there holding a wet dish towel in my hand, realizing I hadn't brushed my hair yet, and for some reason, I suddenly felt exposed. My husband walked up, kissed my cheek, and said, "Guess who's staying with us for a few weeks?" He was grinning. His brother raised a brow and gave a small wave. I smiled, of course. I had to. But as I turned away and put the towel down, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror and something shifted. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. I didn't know then what would happen. Not yet. But I felt it in the back of my neck, that tiny whisper that something was about to change. Something quiet and dangerous. And what followed, well, let me tell you the truth. The kind of truth you hide behind polite smiles and quiet dinners. But before I do, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? And have you ever had a secret you kept so tightly it nearly swallowed you whole? I didn't ask for it. Not the renovation, not the guest, not the weeks of chaos he brought in with him like a storm inside a suitcase. But I didn't protest either. Maybe because I'd grown used to going along with things. Or maybe because deep down, I wanted something to shift. The kitchen had been on my husband's list for months. We'll get around to it, just need the right person to help. Apparently, his brother was that person. A temporary arrangement, he said. A couple weeks. Just while we figure out the cabinets and tile and whatever else people like them care about. I nodded and smiled. I always smile when I'm not sure what else to do. He arrived on a Wednesday. Early evening. It was still warm outside, late spring, the kind of day that feels borrowed from summer. I was barefoot on the porch when I heard the gravel crunch under the wheels. My husband jumped out first. His brother followed, sunglasses still on though the sun had started to sink. They were laughing. That easy, boyish laugh they always had together, a language I never quite understood. He hugged me, said I looked great, complimented the porch swing. I offered lemonade. It all felt rehearsed. Like we were stepping into a play I hadn't read the script for. That night, after dinner, I was cleaning up alone. My husband had gone back to his office's paperwork, he said. His brother stood leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching me rinse plates. He didn't say anything at first, just whistled low under his breath. Then, finally. "You still do everything around here, huh?" I didn't know how to answer that. So I just shrugged. "Old habits," I said. "Or old expectations." There was something in his tone. Not flirtatious, exactly. Not yet. But aware. And it stayed with me. I went to bed early, feigning a headache. My husband never came upstairs. Over the next few days, the house changed rhythm. The sounds of drilling, hammering, sanding. The scent of sawdust mixed with my morning coffee. His brother worked efficiently, faster than I expected, and he was always around. Not intrusive, just present. Sometimes he played music while working. Blues, mostly. Low and smoky. Once I caught myself swaying to it while folding laundry. I stopped as soon as I realized. We had lunch together twice. Nothing significant, sandwiches and leftovers. But we talked. About his travels, about his divorce, about the house we were slowly tearing apart and reassembling. He had stories, wild and funny, and he told them well. I laughed more than I had in months. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found him painting the wall by himself. His shirt was off, it was hot, I assumed. His back was tanned, scattered with freckles. He didn't turn around. Just said, "You okay with this color?" like nothing was unusual. I said yes and quickly left. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror again. I wasn't young. My skin told its stories. But there were parts of me, the curves, shadows, that still held power. I wore a different nightgown than usual. Not for anyone. Just for me. Still, I didn't think anything would happen. Then came the Saturday. My husband had to work, a meeting, he said. An emergency. He left before breakfast, his coffee untouched. I stood in the kitchen, barefoot again, remembering that first afternoon. His brother walked in, shirt slightly damp from the morning air, hair tousled. "Thought I'd fix the cabinet hinges today," he said, reaching for a wrench. I nodded, sipping from my mug. "Need help?" I asked. I don't know why I said it. "Sure. You hold the doors. I'll screw them in place." It was such a simple exchange. Domestic. Ordinary. But the space between us felt charged, like static before a storm. My fingers brushed his once as I steadied the cabinet. He didn't pull away. At noon, we took a break. He poured us iced tea and we sat on the back steps. Quiet. The garden was blooming, roses and lavender. The scent wrapped around us. "You're different," he said suddenly. "From what?" "From before. You used to be quieter." "I don't know." "Smaller." I laughed. "I still feel small most days." He looked at me then, really looked, and something in my chest fluttered. I excused myself soon after. Back inside, I ran cool water over my wrists. My skin was flushed. That evening, my husband came home late. He kissed my temple absently and asked if we'd made progress. I told him the cabinets were almost done. He didn't notice that I couldn't meet his eyes. I went to bed early again. But this time, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house. Footsteps. The creak of the hallway. The soft clink of tools being put away. The storm hadn't come yet. But I could feel the pressure building. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. The next morning felt different, though nothing visible had changed. The sky outside was soft and gray, as if it too had decided to withdraw. I moved through the kitchen slowly, my robe hanging a little looser than usual, hair uncombed, coffee slightly overbrewed. I wasn't myself, or maybe I was just noticing how far I'd drifted from the version of me I used to recognize. He was already outside, hammering something into place beneath the window. I watched him through the glass, unsure what I was looking for. He worked shirtless again, a thin layer of sawdust coating his skin like sand. I wondered if he noticed me watching. I poured him a glass of water and stepped outside, unsure of my own intentions. He took it with a quiet thanks, not quite looking at me, but not avoiding me either. The silence between us had become something of a language, a private, wordless tension that neither of us acknowledged but both participated in. For the next few hours, we moved around each other like dancers out of sync. When I passed him the drill, his fingers brushed mine. When I knelt to pick up a fallen screw, he waited a moment too long before joining me on the floor. It wasn't overt. It wasn't wrong. But it wasn't innocent. Around midday, he asked if I wanted to come with him to the warehouse. We needed more grout and he didn't feel like going alone. I hesitated. It wasn't necessary. I could have said no. But I didn't. The drive was quiet at first. Trees passed by in a blur, and I focused on the vibration in the floor beneath my feet. Eventually, he started talking. Not about anything serious. Just memories. Stories from their childhood I hadn't heard before. How they used to dare each other to climb the neighbor's fence or sneak cookies before dinner. His laugh had a boyishness to it, and I found myself smiling without meaning to. He parked the car at the edge of the lot. The sun had broken through the clouds, and heat began to press in from all directions. We got out, walked inside, moved down the aisles like we belonged there. At one point, I bent down to look at a sample tile, and when I stood back up, he was closer than I'd expected. I turned, and our faces were just inches apart. The air felt thick between us. And then we kissed. It happened so quickly, so quietly, I almost convinced myself it didn't. But the way he stepped back, the way neither of us spoke for a few seconds, it confirmed what words would have ruined. I turned away first, pretending to be distracted by something on the shelf. My heart was pounding, but my expression didn't change. I wouldn't let it. We checked out in silence. In the car, he turned the radio on but kept the volume low. The music filled the space between us, but not enough. I stared out the window most of the ride home, my fingers clenched in my lap. When we got back, I carried the smaller bags inside while he stayed behind to organize tools. My hands were shaking, and I told myself it was from the heat. Later, while slicing vegetables for dinner, I kept cutting them too thin. My focus had scattered. Every few minutes, I checked the clock. My husband would be home in 2 hours. I had time to compose myself. Dinner was normal. My husband talked about work, about a colleague going on leave, about how difficult it was to find good people lately. I nodded in all the right places. I asked follow-up questions. I smiled. I didn't feel a thing. Across the table, his brother barely spoke. He drank his wine slower than usual and excused himself early. Said he was tired. Said the heat had gotten to him. My husband joked about his lack of stamina and poured himself another glass. That night, in bed, I lay facing the wall. My husband's breathing evened out quickly, the way it always did. I used to find that comforting, his ability to fall asleep so fast, like the world couldn't touch him once he was horizontal. Now, it felt like distance I couldn't cross. I replayed the kiss in my head. Not the mechanics of it, but the moment before and after. The silence. The stillness. The sudden certainty that I had stepped over a line I could never return from. It wasn't just the act. It was what it represented. That something had broken open inside me. A door I hadn't even realized was closed for so long. And I didn't know how to shut it again. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I made coffee, cleaned the counters, opened the windows to let the cool air in. He wasn't outside yet. His door was still closed. When he finally came out, we avoided each other. Our interactions were short. Professional. Choreographed. But behind every movement was a vibration. A pull. I caught him watching me once, while I reached for something on the top shelf. His eyes didn't move away when I turned. He didn't smile. Just watched. The rest of the day passed slowly. My husband worked late. Again. Said he had to finalize something. I said I understood. That evening, I sat alone on the back steps. The sun was setting. The air smelled like cut grass and distant firewood. I thought about the woman I used to be, the version of myself I wore like a uniform. Dutiful. Predictable. Silent. She was still there, somewhere. But quieter now. Fading. He came out eventually, sat 2 steps below me. We didn't speak. And still, everything was loud. The next few days blurred together, not because nothing happened, but because too much did, silently, beneath the surface. I moved through my routines with a practiced grace that felt detached from who I was inside. I cooked, cleaned, made phone calls, sent emails, folded towels that no one thanked me for folding. My hands stayed busy so my mind wouldn't. But it didn't work. Every quiet moment turned into a loop of that kiss, of what I'd felt, of what I didn't say. He was careful now. He didn't linger in the hallways. He didn't make any more clever remarks when my husband was nearby. He didn't look at me too long, not directly. But I felt it. I felt him watching when I left a room, when I bent to pick up something from the floor, when I stirred soup at the stove. It wasn't desire anymore. It was tension. Like we were both holding our breath and waiting for someone else to exhale. The air in the house changed. I started opening windows even when it was cold. The sound of birds, traffic, anything, felt better than silence. One morning, I was sitting on the porch pretending to read when I noticed our neighbor walking across her lawn with her dog. She waved. I smiled back. Her expression lingered, though, as if she wanted to ask something. Or say something. I told myself I was imagining it. Later that day, I ran into her by the mailbox. She mentioned a cat that had gone missing. I offered to help check her camera footage, mostly out of guilt for having avoided real conversation for so long. She brought me inside, led me to a small screen on her kitchen counter. We stood shoulder to shoulder as she fast-forwarded through days of uneventful footage. I wasn't expecting to see myself. But there I was, walking from the driveway to the back of our house. I froze. My stomach clenched. I didn't remember this specific moment. It was blurry. From the angle, you couldn't see much. Just two figures, standing close. Very close. She didn't comment. Maybe she didn't notice. Maybe she did and chose silence. I excused myself with a muttered apology and walked back home too quickly. My breath came short and tight, like I'd run uphill. I didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the day. That night, I didn't eat. I told my husband I wasn't feeling well. He kissed my forehead and told me to rest. His touch felt heavy, unfamiliar. Like something I was trying to remember rather than feel. I sat in bed for hours, lights off, back against the headboard, blanket across my legs like armor. I kept thinking about how small moments turn into turning points. 1 second, you're standing in a driveway, unaware. The next, you're wondering who else saw what you barely remember. By the 4th day, I began catching glimpses of things I wasn't meant to notice, his brother watching me as I tied my apron, his eyes moving but his face unreadable, the unfinished cabinet door he'd stopped working on, the way he stood longer in the kitchen after getting water, as if listening to what I wouldn't say. I woke up before dawn that Thursday. The sky hadn't decided whether to be day or night. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, watching shadows change shape in the yard. I thought of packing a bag. Not to leave permanently. Just to go somewhere, anywhere, for the day. But I didn't. That afternoon, my husband asked me to help find a document he'd misplaced in his home office. I hadn't been in that room in weeks. I searched drawers, shifted papers, opened a file cabinet. Then I saw it, an envelope on the corner of his desk, out of place. Not hidden, but not obvious either. It had our address on it. No name. Inside was a single printed photo. Black and white. Blurry. It was us, me and his brother, standing in the driveway. Not kissing. Not touching. But close enough. Close enough that it said everything. I put it back exactly where I found it. He hadn't said anything. Maybe he hadn't seen it yet. Or maybe he had, and he was waiting. For what, I didn't know. An explanation? A confession? Dinner that night was quiet. Too quiet. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, or if everything had shifted. His brother ate quickly and excused himself. My husband lingered, drinking a glass of wine slowly, as if measuring the minutes. I asked how work was. He said it was fine. I asked if he was tired. He said not really. I excused myself early again. As I stood, he said my name. Just once. Softly. I turned. He didn't ask anything. He just looked at me the way he hadn't in years, like he was trying to see past my face, past my smile, into whatever truth I was carrying that I didn't know how to hide. I walked upstairs, undressed in the dark, and crawled under the blanket. I didn't sleep. I waited. For footsteps, for a knock on the door, for anything. But nothing came. The next day, I cleaned the entire house. Not because it needed it, but because I needed it. The rhythm of wiping surfaces, of scrubbing corners, of folding towels into perfect thirds, it gave me a sense of control. Every polished handle felt like an apology. Every swept floor felt like a distraction. In the afternoon, I found myself rearranging the spices. Alphabetically. I hadn't done that in years. I wasn't sure why it suddenly mattered. He came into the kitchen while I was finishing. He didn't say anything. Just leaned against the counter, watching. I didn't turn to look at him, but I felt the tension between us stretch like an old rope about to snap. He finally spoke. Do you want me to finish the drawer today or not? I nodded, still facing the spice rack. Whatever you think. He stayed there a second longer, then walked out. The door closed too gently behind him. That evening, I found a note on the dining table. Folded in half. My name on the outside, nothing else. Inside, only one sentence. It didn't mean nothing. I folded it back slowly. Pressed it flat against the wood. My hands shook, just a little. By the time my husband came home, the note was gone. So was any illusion I had that this could simply pass. The line had been crossed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But it had been crossed all the same. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles in when you know something's wrong but haven't yet been forced to say it out loud. It clings to the air, floats around the corners of the house, and settles on the skin like invisible dust. That's what the next few days felt like, a soft silence before the inevitable sound of something breaking. I tried to keep busy. That became my defense. I reorganized the linen closet, sorted through drawers we hadn't touched in years, cleaned under the couch cushions. I cooked elaborate meals that no one asked for and didn't eat. I folded every piece of laundry with care, pressing invisible wrinkles as if that could somehow smooth the rest of my life back into place. My husband was home less. Longer days at work, or maybe just staying out later. He didn't offer explanations, and I didn't ask. He wasn't cold. Not yet. But distant. And not in the way that was new, this distance felt practiced, measured. Like he was giving me space I hadn't asked for. His brother was quiet too. The usual banter between them had vanished. They spoke like coworkers now, brief, efficient, polite. I watched them from the doorway one evening while they argued about tile adhesive. There was no fire, no warmth. Just muted instructions and nods. Later that evening, he came into the kitchen while I was chopping vegetables. I didn't look up, but I felt him standing just behind me. We need to pick up grout tomorrow, he said. The kind your husband wants is only at that place across town. I didn't respond right away. I kept chopping. He didn't repeat himself. Finally, I nodded. Okay. The next morning, I left a note on the table before we left. Just a quick line, gone to get supplies. Be back later. My handwriting was small and neat, too formal for something so simple. The drive was mostly silent. He didn't put on music. I didn't reach for the radio. The air between us was thick, dense with everything we weren't saying. Every time he turned the wheel, I watched his hands. Strong, steady. The same hands that had once passed me a coffee cup, brushed mine near the sink, written that note I had folded and hidden away. When we arrived at the store, we moved mechanically through the aisles. He picked up a few supplies, made a couple of comments about measurements, but I wasn't listening. I was watching. Watching the way he avoided eye contact. The way he kept his voice low. The way he looked like someone carrying a weight too heavy to name. On the way back, he missed a turn. I pointed it out, but he kept driving. I know, he said. I just want to stop somewhere first. I didn't ask where. 15 minutes later, we pulled into the gravel driveway of the old family property. The one I had only seen in photos. The one they always said needed too much work to bother keeping. The house was still standing, but barely. The paint was peeling, the porch sagging, the windows clouded with dust. He parked without speaking and got out. I followed. The key was still hidden under the third step, just like he'd told me once during a story that I only half listened to. He unlocked the door, and we stepped inside. The smell was old wood and damp fabric. A forgotten house. A place out of time. We didn't explore. We didn't talk. We just stood there for a while. I walked to the window and looked out at the trees, tall and indifferent. The wind moved through them like a breath too deep to hold. He was behind me, close, but not touching. I could hear the way he breathed. Slower than mine. Calmer. Or maybe just resigned. I turned around, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. What passed between us wasn't loud. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was quiet. Heavy. Unmistakable. We spent the night together. The walls didn't creak. The wind didn't howl. The house didn't protest. Morning came slowly. A pale, gray light filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the old floorboards. I sat on the edge of the couch, one that had been covered with a blanket we found in a trunk, and stared at the floor for what felt like hours. He was in the kitchen, boiling water on the old gas stove. The kettle hissed softly. I didn't go to him. I dressed in silence, folding my clothes with care, smoothing each sleeve like it mattered. When I stepped outside, the morning air hit my skin like a confession. Cold, cleansing, unforgiving. The ride home was even quieter than the one before. We didn't touch. We didn't look at each other. The silence wasn't shared anymore, it had turned into a wall. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw my husband's car parked out front. I froze for a second. He's not supposed to be home until noon, I said, mostly to myself. He shrugged. Plans change. I got out of the car slowly. My legs felt heavy. Each step toward the door took effort. Inside, he was at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked up when I entered but didn't say anything. His eyes moved from me to the door, where his brother was still standing. Then back to me. You were gone a while, he said finally. I nodded. It took longer than we thought. He didn't ask where we went. He didn't ask what we did. He just took another sip of coffee and turned his eyes toward the window. For the rest of the day, no one spoke much. His brother disappeared into the garage to work on some shelves. I folded laundry I didn't remember washing. My husband took a nap on the couch, one arm over his eyes, as if blocking out more than just light. But something had changed. It wasn't about the act itself. It was about everything it broke in its wake. I had always believed that silence was safer than truth. That if I just kept moving, kept cooking and cleaning and smiling, everything would remain intact. But now I knew that some silences echo louder than words. And once something has cracked, no matter how carefully you try to hold it together, the pieces remember the break. The following morning, I woke up earlier than usual, startled by a noise I couldn't place. It wasn't loud or urgent, just unfamiliar. I sat up slowly, the sheets tangled around my legs, and looked toward the window. The sun hadn't yet climbed fully over the trees. That gray hour where everything feels suspended was still holding the world in its quiet grip. I dressed methodically, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the floorboards above, the muffled hum of pipes adjusting, the distant clatter of tools outside. Life was continuing. The world, unaware of what had been fractured the night before, carried on with indifference. When I stepped into the hallway, the door to the guest room was open. Empty. His bag was still there, partially unzipped, but he was gone. I went downstairs, passing the living room where my husband sat in his usual spot, coffee in hand, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I entered, his eyes lingering on me longer than usual. "You sleep okay?" he asked, voice neutral. I nodded. "You?" He shrugged. "Didn't notice the bed without you there." I forced a soft smile and moved toward the kitchen. The weight of the conversation pressed into the space behind me, heavy and unspoken. I busied myself with breakfast, though no one had asked for it. Eggs, toast, fruit arranged neatly on plates that remained mostly untouched. His brother returned mid-morning, wiping his hands on a rag as he stepped inside. His eyes flicked toward me once, briefly, then dropped. He greeted my husband with a joke about tools and bad instructions, and they slipped into a rhythm of casual conversation. It was forced, hollow, but functional. I listened from the sink, hands submerged in warm water. I scrubbed dishes that were already clean. I focused on the circles I made with the sponge, on the warmth seeping into my skin, on anything but the pit forming deeper in my chest. By afternoon, the weather had shifted. Clouds gathered, thick and low, promising rain. I stood on the back porch, arms crossed, watching the sky turn the color of stone. The wind tugged gently at the edges of my blouse. The garden needed weeding. I considered doing it, if only for the distraction, but couldn't summon the energy. Inside, the two of them worked in the hallway, adjusting the cabinet doors again. I could hear their measured voices, the occasional clink of metal against wood. Their conversation was all about measurements, angles, what wasn't level and why. None of it mattered. Not really. Around 4, I found a folded piece of paper on the dining table. No envelope this time. No name. I unfolded it carefully, hands trembling before I even read the words. It simply said, "We kissed." That was it. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology. No demand. Just a fact. I stared at the sentence for a long time. My throat tightened. I folded the note again, pressed it flat with my palm, and slid it into my apron pocket. The fabric felt heavy where it lay. Later that evening, my husband came into the kitchen while I was chopping carrots. His movements were casual, but his eyes weren't. He leaned against the counter and watched me work. "You and he seem quiet lately," he said. I paused. Not for long. Just a second. Then I resumed slicing. "He's focused on finishing the job," I replied. He nodded. "That's good. We need it done before next week." There was more behind his words, but he didn't say it. He walked away a few moments later. The floor creaked under his steps. I listened until it didn't anymore. After dinner, I offered to take out the trash. My husband looked surprised. He usually did it himself, but he handed me the bag without a word. I walked it around the side of the house, past the hedges, to the large bin near the fence. He was already there, standing beside it, tying the lid of a second bag. Neither of us spoke at first. The sound of the wind in the trees filled the space between us. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked twice, then stopped. I stood still, bag in hand. He looked at me, jaw tense, eyes tired. There was no invitation, no softness. Only a shared awareness that we stood on the edge of something unspeakable. I dropped the bag into the bin and turned to leave. As I passed him, our arms brushed. Just the lightest contact. But I stopped. So did he. And then we kissed. There was no build-up, no hesitation, no looking around. It just happened. Quiet and inevitable. I stepped back first this time. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't say a word. I walked back to the house with my hands clenched and my mouth dry. Inside, my husband was washing dishes. He didn't look at me when I entered, didn't ask where I'd been. I stood there for a moment, watching him work, watching the way his shoulders moved with each plate. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say something, anything, that would make sense of what I'd just done. But I didn't. I went upstairs and lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. The fan turned slowly above me, slicing the air into pieces I couldn't put back together. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Long enough for the sky to go dark. Long enough for the silence in the house to thicken again. Eventually, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not rushed. Not cautious. Just deliberate. But they passed my door without stopping. I closed my eyes. I told myself it was just a moment. Just a kiss. But I knew better. It was never just a kiss. It was a crack in the wall I'd spent years pretending was whole. And now, no matter how carefully I tried to live around it, I would always know it was there. The days began to layer themselves on top of one another like pages in a book I didn't want to keep reading but couldn't put down. Each morning, I moved through the house like someone acting out the memory of a life. I cooked, I cleaned, I responded when spoken to. I smiled at the right moments, nodded where appropriate. But it was all thin, every interaction, every word, every breath felt like it might tear if pressed too hard. I stopped sleeping through the night. I would wake at odd hours, staring at the ceiling in the dark, the air around me feeling heavier than before. Sometimes I'd go to the window and look out at the yard. Other times, I'd walk quietly to the hallway and just stand outside the guest room door, listening. I never knocked. I never opened it. But I stood there, listening for proof that he was still there, that this was still real. One morning, I found a note slid under my door. No name. No date. Just a line written in a hand I now knew too well. I'll leave if you ask me to. I sat on the floor for almost an hour with that note in my lap. My fingers brushed the ink again and again, as if the texture of the words could help me decide what they meant. I didn't respond. I folded it once, tucked it into a book I hadn't opened in years, and hid it in the bottom of my closet. The kitchen had become the only place where all three of us gathered, if briefly. Meals were now a performance of civility, conversations about the weather, delivery delays on supplies, small complaints about adhesive not setting properly. My husband kept his tone light, his expression easy, but there was something strained about the way he stirred his coffee, the way he cleared his throat before speaking. One evening, while they worked together on the cabinet doors, I sat on the couch pretending to read. Their voices drifted from the hallway, short sentences, low tones, something just above a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm told me enough. They were careful. They were measuring every syllable. Later that night, when my husband went to bed early, I stayed downstairs cleaning the counter. I scrubbed it twice, then 3 times, even though it was already clean. When I turned around, he was standing in the doorway. He didn't come closer. He didn't speak. He just looked at me like he was waiting for me to break the silence. I didn't. He turned and walked back toward the garage. The door shut quietly behind him, and I stood there in the kitchen, the sponge still in my hand, the sink still running. That weekend, he asked me to join him on a drive to pick out paint. Just the 2 of us. It had been a while since we'd done something like that. I said yes, though the idea of being alone with him in the car filled me with a strange kind of dread. We didn't speak much on the drive. He kept the windows cracked, and the wind made it hard to hear anything unless it was said clearly. I appreciated that. At the store, we walked down the aisles side by side but didn't touch. I trailed my fingers along the paint chips, watching colors blur together. I thought we liked this shade, he said, holding up a sample of soft gray. We did, I replied. But maybe it's too cold now. He looked at me carefully, then back at the sample. Maybe. In the parking lot, he paused before opening the car door. Is everything all right? He asked. I felt my breath catch, but I didn't let it show. Why wouldn't it be? I said, too softly. He watched me for a moment longer. Then he nodded and got in. I followed. When we returned, his brother was in the garage, sanding something down. He didn't look up as we parked. I went straight inside, washed my hands even though they were clean, then stood at the sink and stared out the window for longer than necessary. That night, I dreamed I was standing in the middle of the kitchen, but the walls kept moving further and further away. The floor under my feet stretched out, and the ceiling rose above me until I was alone in an empty shell of a house. I woke up sweating, the sheets twisted around me like ropes. The next day, I stayed in my room longer than usual. I didn't feel like pretending. But eventually I went downstairs, because someone had to. Because things still needed doing. The air was heavy. The sky was low and swollen, threatening rain but never delivering it. Even the birds seemed muted. That afternoon, my husband came home early. He looked tired, older than I remembered. He stood in the doorway for a moment before saying anything. Do you want to go for a walk? He asked. It took me a moment to answer. Sure. We walked down the path behind the house, through the narrow trail lined with wildflowers and tall grass. It used to be one of our favorite places. Years ago, we'd come here on lazy Sundays and talk about nothing. Now we walked in silence, each step echoing in the space between us. He stopped near a bend and looked out at the trees. I feel like I don't know you anymore, he said. I didn't respond. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't be a lie or a confession. He turned to face me. His eyes were tired, but not angry. Did something happen? He asked. Something I should know about? I met his gaze, held it longer than I thought I could. Then I looked away. Not in the way you think, I said, because it was the only truth I had left. We didn't speak for the rest of the walk. When we got home, he went straight to his office and closed the door. I sat in the living room, listening to the wind pushing against the windows, thinking about the note in my closet, the kiss by the trash bins, the silence at dinner, the stretch of space between everything that used to be certain. Something had shifted. Not loudly. Not catastrophically. But undeniably. We were no longer who we were. And we could never be again. The morning after our walk was unusually quiet. I woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows, a gentle rhythm that seemed almost apologetic. The world outside was gray and blurred, as if the weather was trying to hide something. Inside, the house felt suspended, like time itself was holding its breath. I moved through the morning slowly. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't tidy the kitchen. I didn't ask anyone if they needed anything. I just existed, quietly, in the space between decisions. My husband had left early, without waking me. The only sign of his presence was the folded towel on the bathroom counter and the faint scent of aftershave still lingering in the hallway. By mid-morning, I heard movement in the garage, tools shifting, drawers opening and closing, the thud of something heavy being moved. I stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, hand resting on the railing, listening. I didn't go to him. I didn't call out. Instead, I sat in the living room and stared out the window, watching the rain draw lines down the glass. I thought about the years that had led to this moment. About the 1,000 quiet choices that had brought me here. None of them loud or dramatic. Just small. Incremental. Invisible from the outside. At noon, I walked into the kitchen and stood there for a long time. I opened the fridge, then closed it again without taking anything out. I ran the faucet just to hear the sound of water. Then I turned it off. I needed something to anchor me, but nothing felt real enough to hold on to. Eventually, I found myself in the laundry room, folding clothes that had already been folded. I smoothed every shirt, adjusted every sleeve, pressed each edge into crisp lines. I was halfway through a pile of towels when I heard the back door open. He stepped inside, shaking the rain from his shoulders, his hair damp and curling at the edges. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. He walked past me into the kitchen, dropped a pair of gloves on the counter, then turned to face me. "I need to return the tile samples," he said. I nodded. "I know. They're in the back of the truck. Want to ride with me?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I wasn't sure if I could handle the silence between us anymore. And yet, I said yes. The drive was slow. The roads were slick and empty, the kind of weather that demanded caution even when your mind was elsewhere. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence had evolved into something else by now. Not comfort, not connection, just a space we both agreed to occupy. When we arrived at the warehouse, he got out first and opened the back of the truck. I helped him unload the boxes, one by one, careful not to let our hands touch. When it was done, he thanked the clerk, and we walked back to the truck without a word. But instead of driving home, he turned left at the intersection. I didn't ask where we were going. 15 minutes later, we pulled into the gravel lot behind the old summer cabin, the same place we had visited weeks ago, the place that had become something else entirely. The rain had stopped, but the air was still wet, the trees dripping quietly around us. He cut the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. "I don't know what to do," he said finally. I looked down at my hands. "Neither do I." We sat in that truck for a long time, the windows fogging slightly from the warmth of our breath. The air was thick with everything we couldn't say, everything we had already done, everything we knew we couldn't take back. Then, as if pulled by something neither of us fully understood, we got out of the truck and walked toward the cabin. The key was still under the step. The door still creaked. Inside, the air was musty, the furniture untouched. We stood in the center of the room, facing each other. There was no tension. No expectation. Just a quiet awareness of what this was. What we had done. What it meant. I didn't speak. I didn't ask him why he brought me there. I already knew. We spent the night together. The rain returned sometime after midnight. I remember lying there on the old couch, the blanket pulled up to my chin, listening to the soft patter on the roof. His breathing was steady beside me, one arm resting near mine but not touching. The space between us had never felt more fragile. I didn't sleep much. My thoughts kept circling back to the same question, over and over, what now? By morning, the sky had cleared, and sunlight poured in through the cracked window panes. Dust floated in the beams of light, suspended in stillness. I got up first, careful not to wake him, and walked barefoot to the small sink to splash cold water on my face. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't want to see myself, not like this. When we left, we didn't speak. We drove back in silence, the same road, the same trees, the same unanswered questions sitting between us. At home, my husband's car was already in the driveway. I froze. "He's not supposed to be home," I said softly. He looked at me. "Plans change." We parked in silence. He grabbed the receipt from the dashboard, handed it to me without meeting my eyes. "I'll unload the truck," he said. I nodded and walked inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I found him in the kitchen, reading something at the table. He looked up as I entered. His expression was unreadable. "You're back," he said. I set the receipt down on the counter. "Yes." He didn't ask anything else. He didn't have to. Later that evening, as I stood at the sink, staring at the garden through the window, I felt something shift inside me, not guilt, not fear, but a quiet acknowledgement. A truth I could no longer deny. Something between us was broken. And no matter how carefully I moved around it, I could still feel the pieces beneath my feet. The morning after we returned from the cabin was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt staged. Like silence wasn't the absence of sound, but a performance of restraint. I woke up already knowing I wouldn't find rest in the usual rhythms of my day. The coffee tasted flat. The kitchen looked too clean. The house, once familiar and lived in, now felt like a set on which we were all pretending to be ourselves. I moved through my routine slowly. My husband had already left for work, or so I assumed. His keys were gone, his side of the bed cold. The only sound was the ticking of the clock in the hallway, unnaturally loud in the stillness. I sat at the kitchen table with a piece of toast I didn't eat, trying to make sense of the weight in my chest. Around 10, I heard movement outside of footsteps across the gravel, the low creak of the garage door. He was back from the hardware store, or maybe he'd never left. Either way, I didn't go out to greet him. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at a spot on the table where the varnish had worn thin. An hour passed before I finally stepped outside. He was kneeling near the base of the porch, tightening something beneath the railing. His shirt was streaked with sweat and dust. He didn't look up when he heard me. Instead, he said, quietly, "You okay?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to. He stood and wiped his hands on a rag. His face was tired, more than usual. We stood a few feet apart, not touching, not looking directly at each other. It was the kind of distance that had nothing to do with space. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said after a moment. "The work's done. It's time." I nodded. "Okay." There was no fight. No plea. Just a quiet understanding that whatever had been building between us had nowhere else to go. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the groan of wood settling, the occasional rush of wind brushing against the windows. I thought about the moment he told me he was leaving, and how my first feeling hadn't been panic, or relief, or even guilt. It had been exhaustion. A deep, bone-heavy weariness that wrapped itself around my ribs and wouldn't let go. In the morning, I dressed before the sun rose. I didn't bother with makeup or perfume. There didn't seem to be a point. Downstairs, I made coffee and poured 2 cups, placing one on the counter where he usually stood. When he came in, his bag slung over his shoulder, he paused when he saw it. "Thanks," he said, nodding at the cup. We stood in silence for a while, each holding our mugs like anchors, trying to steady ourselves. The conversation we weren't having sat heavily between us. He glanced toward the door. "You going to tell him?" I looked down at my cup. "I don't know." He nodded, like that answer was enough. "I didn't mean to," he started, then stopped. "I know," I said. "We didn't say goodbye. We didn't hug. We didn't promise anything." He simply walked out, the screen door clicking softly behind him. I watched from the window as he loaded his bag into the car and drove away, the gravel shifting under his tires, the dust settling before I could breathe again. Later that day, while wiping the counter, I noticed something tucked between the salt shaker and the napkin holder. A folded piece of paper. My name on the outside. I stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was his handwriting, careful but unpolished. "You made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. I don't regret it. But I know it has to end here. Take care of yourself." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer where we kept spare batteries and broken pens. I didn't cry. There was nothing left to grieve. It was already over. That evening, my husband came home earlier than expected. He brought groceries, something he rarely did, and placed them on the counter without a word. I helped him unpack. We moved around each other like strangers who had once shared a life. Over dinner, he spoke about a project at work. His voice was steady, his hands calm. But his eyes, when they met mine, were full of something heavier than suspicion. He wasn't asking questions. He didn't need to. He already knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not in detail. But enough. "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly, interrupting his own story about a delivery delay. I blinked. "What?" He set down his fork. I said, "Are you happy?" The question hovered in the air, raw and unexpected. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes, or at least something safe. But I couldn't. "I don't know," I said finally. He didn't respond right away. He nodded once, then picked up his fork and continued eating, as if nothing had happened. That night, we didn't speak. We didn't touch. We didn't even say goodnight. I lay on my side of the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of all the words left unsaid pressing into my chest like bricks. The next morning, he kissed my cheek before leaving for work. A soft, habitual gesture. But it lingered longer than usual. When he pulled away, he looked at me like he was trying to memorize something. Then he left. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the silence around me heavier than ever. The rain had stopped. The sun had returned. But nothing felt lighter. The damage was done. And though the house looked the same, though the routines continued, though no doors had slammed and no voices had been raised, the fracture was permanent. Some things, once cracked, don't break all at once. They just keep quietly splintering, day by day, from the inside out. The days that followed his departure moved slowly, stretched thin over the routine I continued to perform as if on instinct. Morning coffee. Folded laundry. Quiet dinners. Nothing had changed outwardly, but inside, the silence had taken on a new shape. It wasn't tension anymore. It was vacancy. The absence of weight rather than the pressure of it. And in its place, a kind of dull echo that reminded me something had left the room and wasn't coming back. I stopped expecting anything to happen. There were no more stolen glances, no more carefully timed movements in the kitchen, no more awareness of someone just out of reach. But instead of relief, all I felt was hollow. Like the story that had once consumed me had been closed too suddenly, the final page torn out before I could prepare for the ending. My husband didn't speak of him. Not once. He didn't mention his brother's name, didn't ask if I'd heard anything, didn't wonder aloud why he left so abruptly. But the omission itself was heavy. He wasn't avoiding the topic. He was erasing it. One evening, as I dusted the bookshelves, I found the folded note I had once tucked inside the pages of an old gardening guide. I sat down in the armchair nearby, holding it carefully in my hands, the creases worn soft from my fingers. I didn't read it again. I didn't need to. I knew every word. Instead, I refolded it slowly and slipped it back between the pages. It was easier to pretend, now. Easier to slip back into the rhythm of our marriage. We didn't fight. We didn't raise our voices or slam doors. We functioned efficiently, politely, like co-managers of a small business. Every task shared. Every conversation purposeful. Nothing lingered longer than it needed to. But at night, when the house went still and the lights dimmed, I'd sometimes find myself standing in the hallway outside the guest room. The door remained closed. The bed still made. The room untouched. As if he had never been here at all. I never opened it. One Saturday, my husband invited friends over for dinner. A couple from his office, people I barely knew. I smiled, cooked too much, asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments. The evening passed easily, as if we were still the couple we used to be, comfortable, synchronized, unbothered. But when I cleared the table afterward, I realized how tired I was. Not physically. Not even emotionally. Just a deeper kind of weariness that came from trying too hard for too long. In the days that followed, the weather turned. The wind picked up, colder now, sharper around the edges. Leaves began falling in clusters, covering the lawn in shades of rust and ochre. I found comfort in raking them. In the repetition. In the way they filled the bags, tangible and finite. One morning, as I was taking out the last bag, our neighbor across the street called out to me from her porch. "Good to see you out again," she said. "Feels like it's been forever." I waved back with a smile that felt thinner than it should have. "Just keeping busy," I replied. She nodded knowingly. "That's the best way, isn't it?" I turned before she could ask more. Back inside, I set the kettle on the stove and sat at the kitchen table while it boiled. The room was warm, the light from the window soft. But the quiet was beginning to wear differently now. Less like a blanket, more like a shadow. When the whistle sounded, I poured myself a cup of tea and carried it to the living room. I sat down near the window and watched the breeze bend the trees at the edge of the yard. The steam curled up from the rim of the mug in slow spirals, and for a moment, I let myself feel nothing. Then I heard the door open behind me. I turned my head, expecting my husband, but it was only the wind. The back door hadn't latched properly. I stood, crossed the room, and pulled it closed. As I did, I glanced at the coat rack, 3 hooks, only 2 used now. He hadn't taken much when he left. A bag. A jacket. A box of tools. But somehow the space he left behind still took up more room than everything that remained. That night, after my husband had gone to bed, I stayed downstairs. I lit a candle in the kitchen and sat at the table, staring at the flicker of flame dancing in the draft. I thought about everything I had done. Not just the betrayal, though that sat heaviest. But the years before, the quiet refusals to speak, the silences I'd let harden between us, the needs I'd hidden so deeply I couldn't name them even now. It wasn't about blame. Not anymore. It was about weight. And whether I could carry what I'd done without letting it break everything else I had left. Upstairs, I heard the creak of our bed frame. A familiar sound. One I used to find comfort in. I waited for it to settle, for the quiet to return. When it did, I extinguished the candle and walked slowly up the stairs. In the bathroom, I washed my face, brushed my teeth, moved through the motions of routine like stepping stones in a river I didn't want to cross. In the mirror, my face looked older than it used to. Not tired, just changed. As if the lines had finally settled into their rightful places. I got into bed without a word. My husband turned slightly, his breath warm against the back of my shoulder. We lay there, not touching. Not far apart, but not together either. After a long silence, he whispered, "I know." My breath caught. I didn't move. "I've known for a while," he said, softer now. I just didn't want to ask. Because I didn't want to hear it. I stayed still. I couldn't tell if he meant everything, or just a part of it. But I didn't ask. Because I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it either. A few minutes passed. Then he said, "I don't hate you." That broke something. Not loudly. Not visibly. But something inside me shifted. I turned my face into the pillow and closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I just listened to the sound of his breathing and let it anchor me to the moment. Because for all the weight we carried, for all the silence and distance and hurt, we were still here. And maybe that meant something. Or maybe it just meant we hadn't yet figured out how to leave.